A billionaire stood in a cold hangar in Brayton and told a contract mechanic he couldn't fix a lawnmower. His own maintenance team had spent 9 days failing to repair his $50 million jet, and the man he was laughing at had spent 12 years as a factory field technician working on the exact engines hanging under its wings. Roland Ashford had a $200 million deal set to close in 40 hours and only one working aircraft. And he thought the problem was that nobody had pushed hard enough. He was wrong. Before we go any further, comment below with where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you do not want to miss. It was the third Thursday in October, and at 6 in the morning, the ramp at Brayton Regional was cold enough that the fuel trucks left tire tracks in the frost. Elijah Cross pulled into the gravel lot behind Hangar 4 at 10 to 6, with his daughter asleep in the back seat. He didn't wake her right away. He sat there with the engine running and the heat turned up on her side and looked at the hangar doors. They were still closed, which meant Cardinal Air Center hadn't opened yet, and he was early again. He was always early. Amara Cross was 8 years old, and she had adapted to her father's schedule the way children adapt to weather, by dressing for it. "Are we there?" she said without opening her eyes. "We're here." "Is it the cold building or the warm building?" "The warm building has the front desk and Bernie. You get the warm building." "Good," Amara said. Bernie Ott had worked the front desk at Cardinal for 19 years, and she kept a drawer full of colored pencils that had appeared, without a word, the week after Elijah started. School didn't start until 8:40. No one had ever asked him about the arrangement, which was the closest thing to kindness the working world had shown him in 3 years. Amara got settled at the end of the counter with her sketchbook and a granola bar. She wasn't drawing horses or houses. She was drawing a landing gear assembly she had seen through the hangar door in September. She had about 70% of it right, and the part she'd gotten wrong she had marked with a question mark, which Elijah considered the most promising thing about his daughter. 20 minutes, he said, then homework. I already did the homework. Then 20 minutes, and then more drawing. He stepped out through the side door into the cold. В ангаре номер 4 стоял Вантрелл Меридиан 850, самый дорогой объект в радиусе 40 миль от Брейтона. $50 миллионов в белом композите и краске, настолько гладкой, что в ней можно было бриться. 2 двигателя Thorn 900, подвешенные на хвостовой части фюзеляжа. Салон, отделанный кремовой кожей и ореховым шпоном. Бортовой номер November 847 Альфа Гольф. Он стоял в этом ангаре уже 9 дней. Элайджа точно знал, сколько именно, потому что именно он подметал вокруг него. Такова была работа. Cardinal Air Center был оператором базового обслуживания, а это значит топливо, место в ангаре, кофе и мастерская, где занимались небольшими поршневыми самолетами и изредка легкими джетами. Элайджа работал по контракту с почасовой оплатой. Он менял шины, проводил замену масла и инспекции после каждых 100 часов на учебных самолетах летной школы. А в конце смены подметал пол, потому что Гасу Фальцоне было 68, у него болело бедро, и больше делать это было некому. Самолет Ашфорда не был его самолетом. У него был свой экипаж. Уэйд Корлис был директором по техническому обслуживанию в Эшфорд Групп. 5 числа он прилетел с 2 техниками и жестким кейсом с диагностическим оборудованием и арендовал ангар номер 4 за $1100 в день. Корлису было 48, и он носил на работу черное корпоративное поло и идеально отглаженные брюки-хаки, даже когда работал с самолетом. И Элайджи этого хватило, чтобы кое-что понять, в первые же 4 секунды. 9 дней Элайджа наблюдал, как они работают. Он не сказал об этом ни слова. Люди часто неправильно понимают, как все устроено в ангаре. Ты не подходишь к чужому самолету и не высказываешь свое мнение, потому что в бортжурнале стоит не твое имя. И потому что человек, который так делает, это человек, которого никто не хочет видеть в этом здании. Поэтому он подметал, закрывал свои наряды и держал глаза открытыми, потому что смотреть ничего не стоит. Вот что ему дали эти наблюдения. Бесплатно, за 9 дней. Они заменили 3 компонента. Он знал это, потому что видел, как приходили коробки, а старые агрегаты уходили обратно в тех же транспортных ящиках. И читал наклейки, когда снимал их с палеты, что и было его работой. 6 числа — привод триммера тангажа. 8 — компьютер управления полетом. Потом снова привод, но уже другой блок, 11 числа. 3 детали. Один и тот же симптом. Никто даже не открывал хвостовой отсек. Элайджа 12 лет проработал выездным сервисным техником в Thorn Aero Engines и еще 4 года в ремонтном цехе, где проводили тяжелые формы техобслуживания. И за эти 16 лет он усвоил разницу между тем, чтобы чинить самолет, и тем, чтобы просто забрасывать проблему новыми деталями. Когда ты меняешь 3 блока, а неисправность возвращается, значит, проблема никогда не была в этих блоках. Она в проводе, в разъеме, в кронштейне или в заземлении. Она в той самой вещи, ради которой никому не хочется 6 часов ползать внутри холодного алюминиевого конуса. Он также знал, что самолет подает сигналы, а никто как следует этого не записывает. On the 9th morning, Wade Corliss ran the engines out on the ramp, and Elijah was about 10 meters away choking a Cessna, watching the cockpit through the windshield. He saw the pilot's hand go up. He saw Corliss lean over the center console, and in the reflection on the glass, he saw an amber caution light come on and stay on. Then the airplane shut down and was towed back inside, and Corliss walked away from it fast, phone pressed to his ear. That was Wednesday. Roland Ashford arrived on Thursday at 11:20 in the morning in a car that came straight onto the ramp because somebody had opened the gate for it. Ashford was 57, gray at the temples, wearing a 3/4 length wool coat with no tie, and he moved like a man whose calendar had never once had to wait for him. 2 people came with him. One carried a folio, the other carried nothing at all, which, in Elijah's experience, meant she was the one who actually made the decisions. Elijah was sitting on a rolling stool by the nose of a flight school Cessna with the cowling off, replacing a cracked induction hose, when the whole group came through the staff door and the cold air came in with them. Gus Falzone came out of the office with a limp. "Mr. Ashford." "Where is Corliss?" "He went to get breakfast, I think. He's been here since 5. "Then he can eat later." Ashford stopped in the middle of the hangar floor and looked up at his airplane the way a man looks at a horse that refuses to run. 9 days, Gus. "It's not our airplane, sir. We just rent the hangar." "I'm aware of what you rent." Wade Corliss came in 6 minutes later, and what followed was the part Elijah didn't enjoy watching, because he'd been on the receiving end of it in his 20s, and time doesn't make it any easier to watch. Corliss said the word intermittent 4 times. He said they'd replaced the actuator twice and the flight control computer once. He said the fault wouldn't reproduce on the ground. He said his team was the best in the business and had done everything the manual called for. Every one of those sentences was probably true. Not one of them was an answer. "Friday morning," Ashford said. 7 o'clock. "I need to be in Halstead by 10, and I need to be back here by 6. Can that airplane fly?" "I can have it signed off," Corliss said. Elijah's hand stopped on the hose clamp. He didn't turn his head, but that sentence went through him like cold water. There's a canyon between "I can have it fixed" and "I can have it signed off," and every mechanic alive knows which side of that line people die on. That's what I want to hear, Ashford said. I'd want another day. 2 would be better. You've had 9. Then Ashford turned around in the middle of the hangar. His gaze swept across the floor, past the toolbox and the parts cart and the Cessna with its cowling off, and settled on the man on the rolling stool in a gray work shirt. You, Ashford said. You work here. Yes, sir. What do you make an hour? Elijah set down the screwdriver. He stood up because that was how he had been raised and wiped his hands on the rag. That is between me and Mr. Falzone, he said. The 2 people with Ashford looked up. Something in the room shifted by about half an inch. Fair enough. Ashford almost smiled. Do you know what that is? He pointed at the Meridian without looking at it. A Vantrell 850. Do you know what it costs? Retail, about $50 million. Depends what is in the cabin. There was a brief pause. Then you know it is not a lawnmower, Ashford said. That is the difference between what my people do and what you do. My people fly to Geneva to look at that airplane. You could not fix a lawnmower with the tools in that box. And I mean no disrespect by that. It is simply 2 different worlds. Somebody laughed, not Ashford. One of the 2 technicians in black polos, over by the hard case, let out a short bark of laughter and covered it by turning away. Gus Falzone said, "Now hold on," and got no further because Elijah spoke first. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He said 8 words in the flat tone of a man reading a sign, and the acoustics of the metal hangar carried them into every corner of the building. Then your jet stays dead, Elijah said. The laughter stopped. Roland Ashford turned all the way around to look at him, and for the first time that morning he was really looking. And what he saw was a man in his late 30s, standing very still, with a rag in his hand. Excuse me? You asked your man whether he can sign it off, Elijah said. He can. Signing it off and fixing it are not the same thing. You have had 3 parts put on that airplane in 9 days, and the fault came back every time, which means the problem was never in the parts. He put the rag in his pocket. Nobody has been in the tailcone. Until somebody goes into the tailcone, that airplane is not fixed, and it does not matter who signs the logbook. Wade Corliss said, "Who the hell are you?" Elijah Cross had spent 140 nights a year on the road for 12 years, and he had walked away from all of it to raise a girl who, at that very moment, was drawing landing gear 40 feet away. He gave the only answer he was ever going to give in that hangar. "Nobody," he said. "I sweep the floor." Then he sat back down on the rolling stool, picked up his screwdriver, and went back to work on a $400 induction hose. Behind him, Roland Ashford stood in the middle of his rented hangar and didn't move for a long moment. 19 hours later, that same man would be standing at the front desk of Cardinal Air Center, asking Bernie Ott for the floor sweeper by name. Elijah didn't tell anyone what he'd said. He finished the induction hose, checked for leaks, signed off on the ticket, and at 8:30 picked his daughter up from the front desk to take her to school. In the car, Amara said, "Bernie said a rich man came by." "He did. Was he nice?" Elijah thought about how to answer that honestly, which was the only way he answered anything. "He was in a hurry," he said. People who are in a hurry usually aren't paying attention. And when you're not paying attention, you say things you wouldn't say if you were. "Did he say something to you?" "He said something about a lawnmower." Amara considered that from the back seat with the seriousness of a tiny judge. "That doesn't even make sense," she said. "A lawnmower has one cylinder." Elijah laughed for the first time in about a week. That afternoon, he drove out to the North Field, where the old Brayton overhaul base sat behind a chain-link fence, with grass pushing up through the ramp. There were 4 hangars out there, and 3 of them were empty. In the 4th, a man named Cleveland Pryor kept a 1946 Aranca up on jacks, a project he had been almost, but not quite, finishing for 11 years. Cleveland was 81. He'd started as an airframe and power plant mechanic at the Brayton Overhaul Base in 1969, when there were 2 black mechanics on a floor of 90, and he retired from the trade with a spotless record and a pair of hands gone knotted at the knuckles. He was the reason Elijah had a license in the first place. "You're early," Cleveland said. "I'm always early." "That's a symptom." Cleveland nudged a stool out with his foot. "Sit down. You've got a look on your face." Elijah sat. He told it straight, the way he told everything, and Cleveland listened without interrupting. And when he was done, the old man stayed quiet for a while, working a rag between his fingers. "You said the tailcone out loud," Cleveland said. "I did." "In front of the man who owns it?" "Yes." Cleveland made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "For 16 years, I bit my tongue on a shop floor," he said. "You made it 9 days." "He asked me a question." "He didn't ask you a question. He performed one." Cleveland set the rag down. "Do you know why I never said anything all those years? Not because I was scared. Because the man who tells you the truth about your airplane is the man you resent forever. And I had a mortgage." He looked at Elijah. "You don't have a mortgage. You have a little girl. Which is worse, and you know it." "I know it." "So," Cleveland turned back toward the Aranca, "what are you going to do when they call you?" "They're not going to call me." "Elijah." Cleveland said his full name, the way he did when he wanted something to sink in. "That airplane has a problem they can't find and a deadline they can't move. Of course they're going to call you. The only question is what shape you'll be in when they do." He picked up a wrench and didn't use it. "An airplane doesn't lie to you," Cleveland said. "It waits." Friday morning, the fog rolled in off the river and sat over the field until 9. Elijah worked through a 100-hour inspection on a trainer and didn't look at Hangar 4, which took some effort because at 7:15, the Meridian was towed out onto the ramp with the ground power cart trailing behind it. And at 7:40, the 2 Ashford technicians were still standing on the air stairs with a laptop. At 8:10, Captain Nora Kilbride came out of the flight planning room and slowly walked the length of the airplane once, her hands in her jacket pockets. Elijah watched that walk and understood it completely. That wasn't a pre-flight. That was a pilot making up her mind. Kilbride was 52 and had flown for Ashford Group for 6 years and for a regional airline for 14 before that. She went up the air stairs. She stayed inside for 11 minutes. She came back down, walked to the FBO, and through the glass, Elijah saw her say 4 or 5 sentences to Wade Corliss with her arms at her sides, and he watched Corliss's face change color in stages. Then she walked out to the middle of the ramp and made a phone call, alone, in the cold, which is what a professional does when she wants a record of who she told and when. The airplane did not fly on Friday. What Elijah learned later, piece by piece, was what happened on that phone call. Nora Kilbride told the chief pilot she would not accept the aircraft. She said the maintenance discrepancy for uncommanded pitch trim had been cleared 5 times with the words "Ops checked good," and that the corrective action entries did not describe a repair. She used the phrase, "I'm not signing for it." Then she said one more sentence that was repeated up the chain within the hour. "If you want that airplane in Halstead tomorrow, put someone else in the left seat and tell them what I just told you." Roland Ashford took his meeting by video from the conference room at Cardinal Air Center, a room with 11 chairs, a whiteboard, and a coffee maker from 2009. It did not go well. Elijah didn't need anyone to tell him that. You could see it through the glass. At 4 that afternoon, Wade Corliss and his 2 technicians drove off in a rental car, and the Meridian sat on the ramp in the cold with a red streamer hanging from the pitot cover, untouched by anyone. At 5:20, Roland Ashford came to the front desk. Elijah was at the parts counter in the back with a clipboard, doing the receiving log, and he heard the whole exchange because the door was open. "I need the man who was working here yesterday," Ashford said. "Not Falzone, the other one." "Which one?" Bernie said, in the voice of a woman who had been guarding that desk for 19 years. "The one on the stool, black gentleman, about 40. "That would be Mr. Cross. Is he here?" Bernie did not answer right away. Elijah heard her chair move, and he understood that she was looking down the counter at the girl with the sketchbook, and that Roland Ashford was looking that way now too. It was the first time that man had seen the person who had been sitting in that reception room every morning for 11 months. "Hello," Amara said. "Are you the lawnmower man?" A silence settled over that lobby that Elijah could feel through the wall. "I'm going to get your father," Bernie said. Elijah came out with the clipboard still in his hand. Ashford had his coat over his arm, and he looked 10 years older than he had on Thursday. Up close, without the 2 other people and the force of momentum, he was a man who had not slept. "Mr. Cross." "Mr. Ashford?" "My pilot refused the aircraft this morning." "I saw." "My director of maintenance is on a plane home, commercial." Ashford put something into that last word. "I have a signing in Halstead on Saturday at 11 in the morning. $206 million, 4 parties, and one of them is flying in from Zurich. There is no commercial route that gets me there in time, and there is no charter available within 650 kilometers that I haven't already called." Elijah waited. "Yesterday you said something about a tailcone," Ashford said. "I did. Were you guessing?" "No, sir." "Then tell me what you think is wrong with my airplane." And this is where the story turns on a hinge almost nobody outside the trade would notice, because Elijah Cross did not answer that question. "I do not know what is wrong with your airplane," he said. Ashford's jaw tightened. "You just said you weren't guessing." "I'm not. Guessing is what your team did 3 times. Elijah set the clipboard on the counter. "I have not laid eyes on it. I have not read the logbook, and I have not pulled the fault history. Anyone who tells you what's wrong with an airplane he hasn't opened up is selling you something. Your last 3 parts came from a man doing exactly that." Ashford looked at him for a long moment. "What would you need?" he said. "To take a look. Nothing else. 6 hours in the tailcone with the aircraft on ground power, the maintenance manual, and the logbook. The real one, not a summary." Elijah paused. "And I'd need it in writing from you, that I'm authorized to inspect it, because I'm not laying a hand on another company's airplane on a handshake." "And then you fix it." "Then I tell you what I found," Elijah said. "Fixing it is a different conversation, and it may not be one you like." Behind Ashford, at the far end of the counter, an 8-year-old girl had stopped drawing and was watching her father with her pencil hanging in the air. "Name your rate," Ashford said. "That's the part you're going to have to slow down on," Elijah said, "because the rate isn't the problem." So far, this is a story about a man who was insulted in a hangar and then asked for help by the same man who insulted him. That part is ordinary. That part happens somewhere in this country every single day. Here's what nobody in that building understood on Friday evening, including Elijah Cross. The reason the fault couldn't be found was not because it was hard to find. It was because finding it would put a date on a piece of paper, and that date would answer a question about something that had already happened to someone 8 months earlier, 400 miles away, at 31,000 feet. The letter came out of the Cardinal office printer at 6:15 on Friday evening, and Gus Falzone signed it as the operator of the facility, and Roland Ashford signed it as the owner of the aircraft. It authorized Elijah Cross, holder of an airframe and power plant certificate with inspection authorization, to perform troubleshooting and inspection on November 847 Alpha Golf. Elijah read it twice and then asked for one sentence to be added. "Findings to be reported in writing to the aircraft owner. No corrective action to be performed without a separate written work order." Ashford read the addition. "You're protecting yourself." "Yes, sir." "From me." "From everybody," Elijah said, "including me." Amara went down to Mrs. Delacroix's apartment at 7 with her overnight bag, her sketchbook, and instructions about brushing her teeth. She asked one question at the door. "Is it the big white one?" "It's the big white one." "Okay," she said. Then, on the stairs without turning around, "Take a picture of the inside." He got back to the field at 8 that evening, and the airplane was in the hangar, and the doors were shut, and the space heaters were running, and the whole building was his. This was the part Elijah loved. He had never said that out loud to anyone but Camille. He started with the paperwork, because that's where you start, and anyone who starts anywhere else is just swapping parts with a toolbox. The logbook was a 3-ring binder and a laptop. He wanted the laptop. Modern airplanes store a fault history in non-volatile memory, and the airplane writes to it whether anyone is looking or not, and it doesn't care about anyone's schedule. Elijah pulled the fault history for the last 18 months and printed it out, and it came to 41 pages. Then he sat on an overturned crate under the tail with the pages on his knee and read all 41 of them, which took an hour and 10 minutes, and by the end of it, his hands had gone cold in a way that had nothing to do with October. The airplane had recorded the same fault code 52 times. Not 5, 52. The code was a pitch-trim channel disagreement, and it came in clusters. It showed up in bursts, 3 or 4 events within a few minutes, and then nothing for weeks, and then another burst. And when Elijah lined those bursts up against the flight log, they weren't random at all. They happened during the climb. Every single time. They happened when the fuselage was pressurizing, and the structure was flexing, and everything in that aft section was shifting a few thousandths of an inch relative to everything else. He pulled the maintenance entries and set them beside the fault history, and that was when the second thing became clear, and the second thing was worse than the first. The airplane had reported 52 events. The logbook contained 5 write-ups. 5. And all 5 had been cleared with the same phrase in the same handwriting. Ops checked good, no faults found. Elijah sat with that for a while, in a cold hangar with a $50 million airplane over his head. Then he turned to the 11th page of the fault history and found the burst he had been half expecting ever since he started reading. the one with a cluster of 9 events in 4 minutes on a February afternoon. Next to it in the flight log was a single line: "Return to field, crew request." There was no matching logbook entry at all. He wrote the date on the back of his hand with a ballpoint pen. Then he put the papers in his truck, locked it, came back, and climbed into the tailcone. Getting into the aft section of a Meridian 850 is not glamorous. You go in through an access panel behind the aft pressure bulkhead into a space about the size of a coffin turned on its side. And it's aluminum. And in October, it's 4 degrees Celsius in there, and your body heat needs 40 minutes to make any difference at all. You lie on your back on a moving blanket with a work light, and you can't sit up. Elijah had done this hundreds of times. He knew the exact ache it put in your shoulders. He did it the way Cleveland had taught him, which was the way the old overhaul base had taught Cleveland. You don't go looking for the thing you expect to find. You take inventory of what's there. You start at one end and work your way across, and you touch everything, and you don't skip a bundle just because it looks fine. Bundle by bundle, clamp by clamp. 2 hours in, his left hand had gone numb with cold, and he came out, ran it under warm water in the shop sink, and went back in. At 11:40 that night, he found it. It was 8 inches of wire bundle running along a stringer on the left side, aft of the pressure bulkhead, and where it passed over a fabricated bracket, the protective sleeving had worn through. Not cut, worn through. The kind of wear that takes 18 months of a structure flexing against itself, thousands of pressurization cycles, just a few thousandths of an inch at a time. Under the worn sleeving, 3 conductors had lost their insulation. One of them was shiny and exposed. Elijah lay under it and stared at it for a long time without touching anything. Then he saw the second thing. And that second thing was why this had never been an accident. 6 inches inboard of the chafed spot, somebody had put a splice into that bundle. It was not a factory splice. Factory splices are environmentally sealed, with a heat shrink boot and a part number you can look up. This was a crimp barrel wrapped in self-fusing tape, done by hand, done well, and done by somebody who had been in there before, which meant that at some point in the last 18 months, a human being had been lying exactly where Elijah was lying, with a light in hand, 8 inches from a chafed spot you couldn't possibly miss. And there was no entry in that logbook for any work in the tailcone. Ever. Elijah backed out of the access panel at 12:12 in the morning. He stood in the hangar under the tail, stretched his back, and stayed there for a while, breathing. Then he went and got the camera. He photographed the chafed spot from 4 angles with a scale beside it. He photographed the splice. He photographed the bracket and the stringer and the wear pattern on the sleeving and the part numbers on the surrounding structure so no one could ever claim these pictures came from a different airplane. He took 211 shots. He did not repair anything. He did not clean anything. He touched nothing except the moving blanket. At 2 in the morning, he came out and wrote up his findings by hand at the parts counter in block letters in the format the trade uses because he had learned a long time ago that the only thing that survives a lawyer is a document written before anyone knew there was going to be one. Он записал то, что нашел. Он записал, где именно это было. Он записал, что состояние соответствует длительному перетиранию об установленный кронштейн и что оголенные проводники находятся в цепи, связанной с триммером тангажа. Он записал, что в 15 сантиметрах дальше, по внутренней стороне, есть неучтенная полевой сростка проводов и что ни в одной записи в борт-журнале не описаны работы в этом месте. Потом он написал фразу, на которую решался 4 минуты. В текущем состоянии воздушное судно не является годным к полетам и не должно подниматься в воздух. Он подписал это. Печать он не поставил. Его инспекторский штамп лежал в коробке с войлочной подкладкой в ящике с инструментами и доставался ровно для одной цели, чтобы засвидетельствовать, что нечто годно к полетам. А здесь все было ровно наоборот. Он сфотографировал и подписанную страницу. В 3 часа ночи Элайджа Кросс ехал домой по пустым улицам, а на пассажирском сидении лежали 211 фотографий и написанный от руки отчет. И о Роланде Эшфорде он не думал вообще. Он думал о группе из 9 сбоев за 4 минуты февральским днем, о рейсе, который развернули обратно, и о том, что где-то есть человек, который был на борту того самолета. Роланд Эшфорд был в конференц-зале в 7 утра в субботу, все еще не сняв пальто, и до подписания, которого он уже не собирался делать, оставалось 4 часа. Элайджа поставил на стол ноутбук и развернул его к нему. «Прежде чем я вам что-то покажу, — сказал он, — я хочу сказать одну вещь, а потом больше к этому не возвращаться. То, что сейчас на экране, не мнение. Это фотография вашего самолета, сделанная прошлой ночью, и в кадре виден бортовой номер. Покажите». Он показал. Эшфорд смотрел на фотографию перетертого места около 4 секунд, а потом сделал то, чего Элайджа не ожидал. Он снял пальто. «Это провод», — сказал Эшфорд. «Это жгут проводов. У 3 проводников повреждена изоляция, 1 — голая медь». Элайджа переключил изображение. «А это кронштейн, о который он терся. Такой след износа появляется не быстро». «Насколько не быстро?» «Я бы хотел, чтобы точную цифру назвал металлург. Я скажу только то, что знаю. Это не производственный дефект, и это не случилось на прошлой неделе». «И именно из-за этого триммер ведет себя так, как ведет?» «Это с этим согласуется, и время событий это подтверждает». Элайджа открыл второй файл. «Это собственная история отказов вашего самолета. Не я это написал сам самолет. 52 события за 1,5 года». Эшфорд подался вперед. 52, сказал он. 52. И они группируются во время набора высоты. Как раз тогда, когда фюзеляж герметизируется и конструкция смещается. Элайджа положил распечатанные страницы бортжурнала рядом с ноутбуком. А вот записи о техобслуживании за те же 1,5 года. Посчитайте. Эшфорд counted them. It took him a moment because he counted them twice. 5, he said. 5 write-ups. 52 incidents. And all 5 were cleared with the same 3 words. Ashford read the words. Ops checked good. He read them on all 5 lines, one after another. And Elijah watched a man in his late 50s arrive at a conclusion in real time without any help at all. "This is not incompetence," Ashford said. "That's not for me to say. I'm asking what you think. Then I'll tell you what I found, and you can do the math yourself." Elijah pulled up the last photograph. 6 inches from the chafing, there's a splice in that bundle. It's not a factory splice. Somebody did it by hand. And there's no entry in that logbook, anywhere, for any work done in the tailcone. The conference room went quiet. "Somebody was in there," Ashford said. "Somebody was in there with a light, close enough to touch the chafing, and didn't write it down." Ashford slowly sat down in one of the 11 chairs. "Mr. Cross, in about 3 hours, I'm going to lose a $206 million deal because I can't get to Halstead." He said it flatly. "Tell me what it would take to make that airplane legal to fly today. Not perfect, legal. You said fixing it was a different conversation." "It is, and here it is." Elijah closed the laptop. That repair is not a today repair. That bundle has to be opened up, the damaged section replaced or spliced to spec, the sleeving renewed, the bracket moved or protected so it can't happen again, and the whole thing inspected and returned to service. On a good day, with the right parts, that's 2 to 3 days. The parts aren't in this state. And if somebody signed it off anyway, then somebody would be signing off that an unairworthy airplane is airworthy, Elijah said. That's not paperwork. That's a federal violation. And if the airplane then killed somebody, it's not a violation anymore. It's something with a different name. Ashford put his hand flat on the table. You know what I'm about to ask. I do. What's your number? And this was the moment everything hung on. Elijah Cross had $4,200 in savings. He had a daughter who would need braces in a year and a half, a contract that paid him by the hour with no benefits, and a truck with 190,000 miles on it. He knew exactly what Roland Ashford would have paid. Any number he named in that room would have been agreed to within 5 seconds. There is no number, he said. Everyone has a number. I'm sure that's been true in your life. Elijah set the printed report on the table between them, along with the handwritten one signed at 2 a.m. That's my finding. It says the aircraft is unairworthy and must not be flown. I'm giving you the original, and I have a copy. If you want a second opinion, you should get one, and I'll hand my photographs over to whoever you hire. You're refusing to help me. I have helped you, Elijah said. You had a fault nobody could find. I found it in 6 hours. What you want now is for me to pretend I didn't find it, and that's the one thing I can't sell you. Ashford looked at the handwritten page for a long moment. Do you understand what this is costing me? $206 million, you said. Yes. Then that's what it's costing you. Elijah stood up. I'm not going to pretend that's nothing. It isn't. But it's money. And there's a version of Saturday where you keep the money and something else happens instead. And I've been in this business long enough to know what that version looks like. He picked his jacket up off the chair. One more thing, and then I'm done, he said. Somewhere in your company, there's a record of a flight that turned back. In February. The airplane logged 9 fault events in 4 minutes. The flight log says crew request, and there's no maintenance entry at all. He put the jacket on. I don't know what happened on that airplane that day, but something did, and your fault history knows it. And if I were you, I'd find out before somebody else does. Then Elijah Cross walked out of the conference room, got into a truck with 190,000 miles on it, and drove to a soccer field to watch a team of 8-year-olds lose 4-1. Roland Ashford did not go to Halstead. He sat alone in that conference room for 2 hours with a handwritten page and 41 printed sheets. At 9:40, he made a phone call and canceled his own signing, and the people from Zurich flew home, and 11 days later, the deal went to a competitor. At 10:15, he made a second phone call to a woman named Harriet Wren, who had been aviation counsel for his company for 9 years. He said, Harriet, I need you to find out what happened on my airplane in February. It took her 4 days to get the answer. Her name was Renata Salas. She was 31 years old. She had been a flight attendant for Ashford Group for 2 years, and she had been standing in the aisle with a tray of glassware when the airplane pitched down without anyone commanding it to. She hit the ceiling, and then she hit the seat rail. The crew got the plane back under control and returned to the airfield. An ambulance met the aircraft, and she was found to have a fractured vertebra and nerve damage down her right leg. She stayed in the hospital for 9 days. She never worked as a flight attendant again. There was no maintenance log entry for that flight. Internally, the incident had been recorded as an encounter with moderate turbulence. 7 months earlier, Renata Salas had signed a settlement for $140,000 along with a non-disclosure agreement because a lawyer had told her that proving anything more would take 3 years and money she did not have. She was living with her mother in Halstead and working part-time at a call center, getting to her feet every 20 minutes because sitting was painful. There had been no turbulence that day. The weather data showed smooth air at cruising altitude for 200 miles in every direction. The following Wednesday, Harriet Wren called Roland Ashford and told him everything. And later, under oath, she would describe the silence on that call as the longest she had ever experienced with a client. Then Ashford said, "Get me the mechanic, the one from Brayton." "Sir, I would advise against contacting him directly." "Get me the mechanic," Ashford said. But by Wednesday, someone else had already reached Elijah Cross first. Wade Corliss had been director of maintenance at Ashford Group for 6 years. He owned a house with a boat docked behind it, and on Saturday afternoon, he understood something that did not occur to Roland Ashford until Wednesday. He understood that a contract mechanic in Brayton had photographed his splice. The first move came Monday morning, and it did not come from Corliss. It came from a company nobody had ever heard of. At 8:40, Gus Falzone got a call from the leasing company that held the note on Cardinal Air Center's fuel farm. There was a compliance issue involving subcontracted maintenance labor at the facility, specifically whether Cardinal carried adequate coverage for contract personnel performing inspections on turbine aircraft. It was not a threat. Nothing in this part of the story is ever a threat. It was a question, asked by a polite person, that would take a 68-year-old man with a bad hip about 30 hours to answer. Gus came out of the office and stood in the hangar doorway. "Elijah, I heard your side of it. I'm not going to be able to keep you on the schedule past the end of the month." Gus said it to the floor. "It isn't me. I know it isn't you. I've been running this field for 19 years. Gus." Elijah waited until the old man looked up. "You didn't do anything. Somebody made a phone call about your insurance. That's all that happened. Don't carry it with you." Gus went back inside and didn't come out again for 2 hours. The second move came on Tuesday, and this one had real teeth. Elijah got a letter from the Brayton Flight Standards District Office. A complaint had been filed alleging that a certified mechanic had performed unauthorized maintenance on a turbine aircraft without the operator's consent, and that photos of that aircraft's internal structure had been taken and distributed without authorization. The letter was a formal notification. It advised him that the matter was under review and that he might be contacted. At the bottom, in the standard boilerplate language, was the sentence that turns a mechanic's stomach. "This matter may affect the status of your certificate." Elijah read it at the kitchen table while Amara worked on long division about a meter away. A mechanic's certificate is everything. It's not a diploma hanging on a wall. It's the legal authority to do the only work he knows, and the inspection authorization on top of it is a renewable privilege that the administrator can refuse to renew for cause. His was up in March. That evening, he did 3 things in order. He put the authorization letter signed by Falzone and Ashford into a folder. He copied every photograph and the fault history onto 2 thumb drives and put one in a bank deposit box on Wednesday morning. And he wrote out, by hand, a timeline of every date and time and who had been present, going back to October 5th, because Cleveland had told him 20 years earlier that memory is not evidence, but paper is. Then he called the number on the letter, which most people don't do. He got the voicemail of an aviation safety inspector named Dolores Fenn, and he left a message that was 50 seconds long. He gave his certificate number. He said he had received the notification, that he welcomed the review, that he had written authorization from both the facility operator and the registered owner, and that he had 211 photographs and a written finding he would provide immediately upon request. Then he said one more sentence, and it was the sentence that changed the shape of the next 4 months. I would also ask the office to compare the aircraft's recorded fault history with its maintenance record, Elijah said. There are 52 events and 5 entries. He hung up and sat in the truck in the bank parking lot for a while. The third move was the one that cut closest to the bone. On Thursday, an insurance adjuster for the underwriter of November 847 Alpha Golf sent a demand letter directly to Elijah Cross at his home address. It claimed that unauthorized entry into the aft fuselage may have caused or worsened the damage to the wire bundle in question, and it reserved the right to seek reimbursement for repair costs, then estimated at $460,000. $460,000. He had $4,200. If this story is getting to you, like the video and tell me in the comments what you would have done. Elijah didn't sleep much that week. He never told anyone, but more than once the kitchen light was on at 3 a.m, and Amara noticed. Because Amara noticed everything. Thursday night, she came out in her socks. You're awake. I am. Is it about the airplane? Elijah closed the folder. 3 years earlier, in a hospital parking lot, he had promised himself he would not build a house of comfortable lies around this child. Because one day, she would be an adult, and she would need to know how the world really worked. There's a company saying I damaged their airplane, he said. I didn't, but they can say it, and it takes money to prove that I didn't. Do we have the money? No. Amara climbed into the chair across from him and rested her chin on her hands. Why did they say it? Because I found something wrong with the airplane and wrote it down, and now some people want what I wrote down to be wrong. Is it wrong? No. Then can't you just show them? I did show them. Elijah almost smiled. That's why they're angry, baby. Not because I'm wrong, because I'm not. Amara thought about that. Then she said something Elijah would repeat to exactly one person months later, and the first time he tried, he wouldn't be able to finish it. Then it's not a money problem, she said. It's a being brave problem. You're just bad at those because you're so tired. He stood up, walked around the table, and held her for a second longer than she expected. On Saturday at the North Field, Cleveland Pryor read the entire file with his glasses low on his nose, 1 page at a time. It took him 40 minutes. Elijah didn't speak while he read. You called the FSDO yourself, Cleveland said. I did. Before they called you. Yes. Cleveland set the papers down. Then you're all right, he said. Not comfortable. All right. There's a difference, and you'll feel it around March. He tapped the demand letter with 2 fingers. This is theater. A $460,000 demand against a man with a truck isn't an attempt to collect money. It's an attempt to make you stop talking. They send it to your house, so your kid is the one who brings in the mail. Elijah's jaw tightened. You know what they did wrong, Cleveland said. Which part? They went after your certificate. The old man's voice changed. Everything else they did is business. Going after a man's ticket is different, because now the government has to take a look. And the government doesn't just look at the one thing you point to. He handed the file back. They aimed a federal inspector at that airplane, Elijah. They did that, not you. Outside, the wind swept across the north field and rattled the empty hangar doors on their tracks. Now, Cleveland said, you've got a harder question than any of this, and I want you to answer it before somebody asks you in a room with a recorder running. Go ahead. That girl in February, Cleveland said. Do you go find her, or do you leave her alone? Elijah didn't answer for a long time. I've been trying to decide for 8 days, he said. And? If I go find her, a lawyer will say I recruited a witness. He turned his cup on the bench. And if I don't go find her, she spends the rest of her life thinking turbulence hurt her. Cleveland nodded slowly. That's the right shape of the problem, he said. Now tell me which one you can live with. But it didn't come to that, because the following Tuesday, Renata Salas called him. She got the number from Harriet Wren, who shouldn't have given it to her, and gave it to her anyway, then wrote a memo for her own file about having done it. Mr. Cross, my name is Renata Salas. I was on that airplane in February. Elijah sat down on the tailgate of his truck in the Cardinal parking lot. Yes, ma'am. A lawyer for the company that used to employ me called me on Monday and asked if I'd be willing to speak with a federal inspector. Her voice was steady in that way that costs something. And then she told me why. She told me a mechanic found a wire. I did. They told me it was turbulence. There was a pause on the line. For 8 months, Mr. Cross. I have a nerve issue in my right leg. I can't sit for more than 20 minutes. I went to physical therapy twice a week for 5 months, believing the sky did that to me, and it was a wire. Elijah stared out across the ramp at nothing. Ma'am, I want to be careful here, he said. I found a chafed wire bundle, an undocumented splice, and a fault history. I have not seen anything that proves what happened on your flight. I'm not going to tell you I know, because I don't. Everyone else has told me what they know, Renata said. You're the first person in 8 months to tell me what he doesn't. There was a silence. I signed something, she said. In March, there's a clause. Then before you say another word to me, you need to talk to a lawyer of your own, not theirs, yours. I can't afford a lawyer. There are lawyers who take cases like this on contingency. There are legal aid offices, and there's a state bar referral line. Elijah paused. And Miss Salas, I'm going to say one thing and then stop, because I don't ever want anyone saying I coached you. A non-disclosure agreement does not stop you from talking to a federal safety inspector. It can't. That is not something a company can buy. He heard her exhale. Say that again, she said. Slower. He said it again, more slowly. Dolores Fenn called him back 11 days after his voicemail, which he later learned was quick. Aviation Safety Inspector Fenn was in her 40s, had come out of an airline maintenance control center, and had the particular flat courtesy of someone whose job is to be unimpressed. She asked him to come to the Flight Standards District office on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. She did not tell him what the meeting was about, which is standard, and which does nothing for a man's sleep. He brought the folder. Fenn spent the first 20 minutes on the complaint against him, and she did it thoroughly, and Elijah answered every question with a date. She asked to see the written authorization. She read both signatures. She asked whether he had performed any maintenance, and he said no, only inspection. And she asked him to define the difference the way the regulation defines it, and he did. Then she asked why he had not stamped his finding. "Because my stamp says something is airworthy," Elijah said. "That report says the opposite. It gets a signature, not a stamp." Fen looked at him for a second longer than she had been. "All right," she said, and set the complaint file aside. "Mr. Cross, that complaint is not going anywhere, and I'll tell you that now so you can sleep. Whoever filed it did not think through what they were inviting." "Yes, ma'am." "Let's talk about the 52 events." They talked for 3 hours. At the end of it, Fen asked for the photographs and the fault history, and Elijah gave her a thumb drive, and she gave him a receipt for it, and then she leaned back. "You understand what you've handed me," she said. "I think so." "You've handed me a records case." Fen folded her hands. "The wire is a maintenance issue. Wires chafe, it happens. That's why we inspect. The 52 versus 5 is something else entirely. And an undocumented splice in a flight control circuit with no logbook entry is a third thing. Those are not the same investigation, and they do not go to the same place." "No, ma'am." "Understand how this works, because people always get this wrong." She leaned forward. "I do not punish people for finding problems. I have spent 19 years trying to get mechanics to write things down. The entire system depends on a man in a freezing tailcone at midnight deciding to tell the truth about what he sees. That's it. That is the whole safety system at its core. Everything above that is just paperwork about what he wrote." She stood up and held out her hand. "You did your job," she said. "Now I'm going to go do mine. And it's going to take months, and you're not going to hear from me. And that is not a bad sign." Then November came, and December, and the part of these stories nobody ever films. The Cardinal contract ended on October 31st. Gus Falzone paid him for 4 days he hadn't worked, which Elijah found in the envelope after he had already left the building. He got a job at a truck fleet shop on the industrial road, 41 hours a week, working on diesel engines, brake jobs, and air systems. It paid $23 an hour. It was honest work, and he was good at it, and it had absolutely nothing to do with 16 years of turbine experience. His inspection authorization renewal was due in March, and the administrative hold the FSDO had placed on it during the review stayed in place. Nobody was acting out of malice. There was an open file, and the office does not renew anything against an open file. Understanding that did not make it go any faster. The demand letter was followed by a second letter in December, this one with a number in it, and Elijah did what Cleveland told him and did not answer it himself. He also sold the tool chest on December 4th. Not all of it. The turbine-specific tools, the borescope, the torque adapters he had bought over 16 years, 111 pounds of steel and calibrated instruments that meant nothing at a truck fleet shop. A mechanic in the next county over bought the whole lot for $3,100, and he came with a trailer, and he was decent about it, and afterward Elijah stood in his own garage with a lot of empty space in it. Amara found him there. "Where did the drawers go?" "I sold them." "The blue ones with the round tools?" "Those too." She looked at the empty floor for a while. "Are we still doing Christmas?" she asked in a small, careful voice. And Elijah realized his daughter had been doing calculations in her head that no 8-year-old should ever have to do. He knelt down. "Yes," he said, "we are doing Christmas. Look at me. Money is tight, and it's going to stay tight for a while, and I'm not going to lie to you about that. But we still have the apartment, and we still have the truck, and I have a job. Nobody is taking anything away from us. Do you understand? Then why did you sell the tools? Because right now, I'd rather have the money than the tools. Are you going to buy them back? And Elijah Cross, who had never lied to this child, heard himself say, I don't know. Amara nodded and accepted that, and carried it with her the way children do. Then she said, Was the wire real? The wire was real. Okay, she said. Then it's fine. She went inside. Elijah stayed in the garage a while longer. 2 weeks later, on December 19th, a plane took off from Brayton Regional, and at 9,000 feet, something happened that put all of this on the front page. Here's what nobody outside the industry understands about a wire like that. It does not get better. There is no mechanism by which it gets better. With every pressurization cycle, the bundle shifts against the bracket by a fraction of a millimeter, and the copper is a little more exposed than it was on the flight before. And one day, that exposed conductor touches something it shouldn't, and the airplane does what it's told by a signal nobody ever sent. The Meridian was not repaired in October. It was moved. Wade Corliss had been terminated on November 8th, though Elijah did not know that at the time. Ashford Group's flight department was down to 2 people and an aircraft with an unresolved discrepancy, and someone at that company made the decision that the airplane should be ferried to a maintenance facility in another state for evaluation. There is a legal way to do that. It's called a special flight permit. You apply to the administrator, state the condition, demonstrate that the aircraft can be flown safely for that specific purpose, and then fly it empty with a minimal crew under restrictions. The application was submitted on December 12th, and it listed the discrepancy as an intermittent pitch trim anomaly, cause undetermined. It did not mention a chafed wire bundle. It did not mention a photograph. It did not mention that the registered owner had been handed a written finding on October 18th that used the word unairworthy. The permit was granted on the 16th, based on the information provided. On December 19th at 8:50 in the morning, November 847 Alpha Golf departed Brayton Regional with 2 pilots on board and no one else. Captain Nora Kilbride was in the left seat. She hadn't exactly been asked to take it. She'd been told the airplane was going no matter what. And she made a decision Elijah would be thinking about for a long time afterward. If that airplane was going to fly, she'd rather be the one at the controls. She was the only pilot in the company who had read the discrepancy history. She briefed it on the ground. She went over the trim cutout procedure twice. She hand flew the airplane. At 9,200 feet on the climb, 4 minutes after takeoff, the nose dropped. It wasn't violent. In a way, it was worse than violent. It was smooth, and it was continuous, and it didn't stop. A steady, uncommanded nose-down trim run, with the airplane accelerating and the ground rising in the windscreen. Kilbride had both hands on the yoke, pulling against a machine that had decided to go the other way. Her first officer reached for the trim cutout switches, and it took 4 seconds, and 4 seconds is a long time. They stopped the runaway. They leveled off at 7,100 feet with 180 pounds of force on the yoke, declared an emergency, and came back to Brayton, landing the airplane manually with the trim frozen where they had cut it. No one was hurt. Nothing was damaged. And because no one was hurt and nothing was damaged, this story was allowed to become what it became instead of the other thing. Nora Kilbride taxied that airplane to the ramp, shut it down, made the logbook entry in her own hand, and then sat in the left seat for 4 minutes before she got up. Then she went inside and called the Flight Standards District office herself. Cody Whelan was 22 years old and had been a line technician at Cardinal Air Center for 7 months, and he was out on the ramp with a fuel hose when the Meridian came back. He filmed it. He filmed the airplane on final with the gear down, the emergency vehicles moving into position along the runway, the landing, and the taxi in. 41 seconds of vertical phone video with wind noise blowing out the microphone. That night, he posted it to an aviation forum with a caption that said only, "Brayton Regional today, corporate jet, declared emergency, trim runaway." By Sunday, it had 11,000 views, and someone had matched the tail number to a registration database. By Monday, a reporter at the trade publication Flightline Weekly had pulled the special flight permit application, which is public record, and noticed that the discrepancy listed on the application said, "Cause undetermined." On Tuesday, December 23rd, that reporter called Elijah Cross at 7 that evening and asked whether it was true that he had inspected that aircraft in October. Elijah was standing in his kitchen with the phone to his ear, while his daughter, about 12 meters away, was watching a movie about a reindeer. "I'm not going to comment on that," he said. "Mr. Cross, I have your name in a document." "Then you have my name in a document." Elijah kept his voice even. "There's an open matter with the FSDO, and I'm not going to say one word about that airplane to a reporter while an inspector is still working it. If Inspector Fenn tells me it's appropriate, I'll speak with you. Until then, no." There was a pause on the other end. "That's a first," the reporter said. "No, it isn't," Elijah said. "It's just not the version that gets printed." He hung up. Then he stood at the counter for a minute, and it all hit him at once. The way things do when there's no one there to put on a face for. The airplane had flown. Somebody had put that airplane in the air after being handed a page with the word unairworthy on it, and 2 people had come very close to dying at 9,000 feet over the Brayton Reservoir. And the only reason they hadn't was that a captain had read the discrepancy history and briefed the cutout. He put both hands on the counter, lowered his head, and stayed that way. "Dad? I'm okay." "You don't look okay." "I'm tired." He straightened up. "Come here a minute." Amara came over and wrapped her arms around his waist and didn't ask anything else, which, Elijah thought, was an act of considerable grace from a person who was 8. Christmas was small. He got her a set of drafting pencils, a book about how airplanes are built, and a used bicycle he had spent 3 weekends fixing up, repainted in the garage where the tool chest used to be. She rode it up and down the parking lot in -2-degree weather until her hands hurt. On December 28th, Dolores Fenn called him at home. "Mr. Cross, I'm going to say 4 things, and I'm not going to elaborate on any of them, so listen." "Go ahead." 1. The complaint against your certificate was closed as unsubstantiated on the 22nd. You'll have the letter in a week. Elijah sat down. 2. The administrative hold on your inspection authorization renewal was lifted that same day. Apply in March as usual. Yes, ma'am. 3. This office has opened an enforcement investigation into maintenance record falsification and the information provided in a special flight permit application. I'm not going to discuss it, and you shouldn't either. Understood. 4. Fenn paused, and for the first time in 3 conversations, she sounded like a person instead of an office. Your report from October 18th is in the file. It's dated 8 weeks before that airplane took off. You should know that. She hung up. Elijah sat in his kitchen with the phone in his hand for a long time. Then, at 9 that night, in the final week of December, someone knocked on his apartment door in the rain. Roland Ashford was standing in the exterior hallway of a garden apartment complex on Vance Road, rain spilling off the gutter behind him, with no umbrella. He had come alone. There was no car idling at the curb with someone waiting inside. "Mr. Cross, I'm sorry about the hour, and about coming here. I got the address from Harriet Wren, and she told me not to come." Elijah stood in the doorway and did not open it any wider. "My daughter is asleep." "Then I'll keep my voice down, and if you tell me to leave, I'll leave, and I won't come back." Elijah looked at him for a moment. Then he stepped out into the breezeway himself and pulled the door nearly shut behind him, and the two of them stood under a concrete overhang in the December cold with the rain falling just 4 feet away. "Say it," Elijah said. "My airplane nearly went into the ground 9 days ago with 2 people in it." "I know." "I signed a permit application that said cause undetermined." Ashford's voice was not the same voice from the hangar. "I didn't write it. I signed it. I had a written report in my desk with your signature on it saying the aircraft was unairworthy, and I signed a document saying the cause was undetermined, and I have spent 9 days trying to find a way to explain that to myself that isn't the obvious one." He stopped. The rain filled the silence. "There isn't one," he said. Elijah said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that when a man is finally telling the truth, the worst thing you can do is help him. "I've also read the file on Renata Salas." Ashford looked out at the parking lot. 31 years old, fractured vertebra, 8 months of being told it was the weather. My company paid her $140,000 and bought her silence. And I approved that settlement in a batch of 11 items on a Thursday, and I never read past the summary line. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only person in this who doesn't want anything from me," Ashford said. "Everyone else in my life right now is either billing me or protecting me. You told me no when the number was still blank." "I want you to hear something," Elijah said. "I didn't do anything special. I read the paperwork and opened the access panel. Any A&P mechanic in this county with 6 hours and a work light would have found that wire." "No," Ashford said. "That's not true. And I think you know it's not true. And I need it not to be true, or none of the rest of this makes any sense. My people had 9 days and a hard case full of test equipment. You had 6 hours and a moving blanket." "Your people had 9 days and a deadline," Elijah said. "That's not the same as 9 days." Ashford took that in. "You said something in the hangar," he said. "You said your jet stays dead." "I did?" "I've been turning that over in my mind for 2 months." He put his hands in his coat pockets. "At the time, I thought it was a threat, and I was a little impressed by it, because people don't talk to me that way. It wasn't a threat, was it?" "No." "It was a diagnosis." "It was a fact," Elijah said. "That airplane had a broken wire in the tail. It was going to keep doing what it was doing until somebody fixed the wire. It didn't care about your deal, and it didn't care what I make an hour, and it didn't care what either of us thought about the other." "That's the whole thing." He looked out at the rain. "An airplane doesn't lie to you. It waits." Ashford was quiet. "Is that yours?" "No, sir. It belongs to a man named Cleveland Pryor. He's 81, and in 1969, he was one of 2 black mechanics on a crew of 90 at the Brayton Overhaul Base, and he taught me everything I know about how to look at an airplane." Elijah paused. He also taught me to put my name only on what I know. That's the only reason you're standing here instead of talking to an insurance company about a total hull loss. Roland Ashford stood in the breezeway in the rain for a while. I came here to offer you a job, he said. I had a number in my head on the drive over, and it was a good number. And about halfway up the stairs, I realized that if I said it out loud, you'd think it was the same conversation we had in October, and it would be the last thing I ever said to you. It would have been. So I'm not going to offer you a job. Ashford took a breath. I'm going to ask you a question instead, and you can tell me it's not your problem because it isn't. What should I do? And Elijah Cross, who had been called a man who couldn't fix a lawnmower in front of 9 people in a cold hangar, gave the man an answer. 3 things, he said. Do them in this order, and don't do the second one before the first. Go ahead. First, call the inspector at the Brayton office. Not your lawyer, you. Tell her everything, including the part where you signed the permit application after reading my report. Do not let Harriet Wren dress it up. It is going to cost you, and it is going to cost your company. And there is no version of this where it does not. Second is Renata Salas. Elijah's voice did not change, and yet something in it still turned harder. You do not send anyone. You do not send a check. You go yourself, and you tell her what actually happened to her, and then you release her from that agreement in writing, and then you make it right on whatever terms she names. Not your terms, hers. Ashford nodded slowly. And third? Third is the one you are not going to like, Elijah said. Fix the way you buy maintenance. You had a man running your flight department who signed off on 52 events with 5 log entries, and he did it for 6 years, and you never once asked why your maintenance costs were lower than everyone else's. He was not saving you money. He was borrowing it from the airplane. He looked Ashford straight in the eye, and the airplane came to collect on December 19th at 9,000 feet. The rain kept falling. That is the whole answer, Elijah said. There is no fourth part, and there is no part where you hire me. Ashford held out his hand. Elijah looked at it, and for a moment, everything the man had said in the hangar in October was there between them, still hanging in the air, never taken back. Then Ashford said, I said something to you in front of 9 people. I have thought about that too. I know you have. I do not think an apology in a stairwell counts for very much. It is worth what it is worth, Elijah said. Then I am sorry, Roland Ashford said. I looked at you, and in about a second and a half, I decided what you were. And I was wrong in every possible way. And the price of my being wrong is going to be paid by a woman in Halstead with nerve damage and by 2 pilots who had 4 seconds to find a switch. Not by me. That is the part I cannot get past. Elijah Cross took the man's hand, shook it once, and let go. He did not say it is all right because it was not. He did not say thank you because he had not been given anything. He gave a small nod, the kind that closes the subject, and that was all. Go call the inspector, he said. Tonight, if she answers. Ashford went down the stairs into the rain. Elijah went back inside, checked on his daughter, and stood for a while in the doorway of her room in the dark. She was asleep, with her sketchbook lying open on the floor beside the bed. Roland Ashford called Dolores Fenn at 8:15 the next morning and they talked for 2 hours and 11 minutes with no lawyer present. And that call became the backbone of everything that happened that spring. What brought Wade Corliss down was not the wire. It was never going to be the wire. Wires chafe. That's why airplanes get inspected, and a chafed wire bundle in a corporate jet, by itself, means a maintenance report, a 2-day repair, and nothing more. What brought him down was that he had written the same 3 words 5 times. Ops checked good, no fault found. An entry in a maintenance log is a legal statement. When a mechanic writes that he performed an operational check and found no fault on an aircraft whose own system memory recorded 11 fault events in that same 2-week period, that is not a mistake. It is a false entry in a required record, and the federal aviation regulations have a specific section covering it, and the penalties are not merely administrative. The enforcement case dragged on until April. Wade Corliss surrendered his airframe and power plant certificate in a settlement in May, permanently, with no chance of getting it back. He also entered a plea in a federal case involving the special flight permit application, which he had prepared, and received 18 months probation, a $40,000 fine, and a ban on holding any position of maintenance authority for any air carrier or operator. He was 50, and he never worked in aviation again. Ashford Group paid a civil penalty of $2,800,000 for maintenance record violations involving 3 aircraft, because once the investigators started looking, they did not stop with the Meridian. Roland Ashford was not charged. His 2-hour phone call on December 29th, made without counsel and before any subpoena, was cited by the government in its filings as substantial voluntary disclosure. Harriet Wren told him afterward that it was the single most expensive and the single most valuable phone call of his professional life, that she would have advised against it every time, and that she was glad he had not asked. He also lost things that were not measured in fines. The Halstead acquisition went to a competitor. 2 board members resigned in February. In March, Flightline Weekly ran a piece under the headline, 52 events, 5 entries, and it was picked up by 2 national outlets. And for about 6 weeks, Roland Ashford's name appeared in print attached to a story about a company that had chained its own safety reporting to a deal timetable. He did not give an interview. He was advised not to, and for once, he took the advice. Renata Salas got a different kind of spring. Roland Ashford drove to Halstead himself on January 2nd and sat in her mother's living room for 90 minutes, telling her the whole story from start to finish, including the part about the 11 write-ups on that Thursday. She did not make it easy for him. 3 times she asked him to repeat the date the company had first been told about the trim events, and 3 times he gave it, and every time it was 17 months before her injury. She was released from the non-disclosure agreement on January 8th. The revised settlement was negotiated over 5 months by a lawyer she chose herself. The final amount was never made public. What did become public, because she wanted it to, was that the agreement contained no confidentiality clause of any kind, at her insistence, and that Ashford Group issued a written statement acknowledging that the injury Renata Salas suffered on February 14th had been caused by an uncommanded pitch trim event, not turbulence. She framed that statement. She said so in an interview in June. She still can't sit for more than 20 minutes. No settlement can repair a damaged nerve. But she went back to school that fall to study aviation safety management. And in that June interview, she said one thing that was quoted more than anything else in the entire story. For 8 months, I thought the sky had done this to me. A man I've never met found a wire and wrote it down, and that's the only reason I know what happened inside my own body. In April, Nora Kilbride received a national award from a professional pilots association for how she handled December 19th. Her acceptance remarks lasted 90 seconds. She said she had briefed the trim cutout on the ground that morning because she had read a discrepancy history and a written finding by a mechanic at Cardinal Air Center. She said his name from the podium. Elijah Cross was not in the room. He was at a truck fleet shop on the industrial road doing a brake job on a tandem axle. Cody Whelan's 41 seconds of vertical video ended up in a training presentation used by 2 flight departments. Dolores Fenn closed her file in July and never spoke publicly about any of it, because that was the job. The letter closing the complaint against Elijah's certificate arrived on January 4th in a plain envelope. Unsubstantiated, 2 paragraphs. He read it standing at the mailbox in the cold, then read it again in the truck. His inspection authorization was renewed in March without incident. The insurance demand letter was withdrawn in February in a single sentence with no explanation and no apology, which is how those things end. In April, a lawyer Elijah had never hired sent him a check for $11,400 for legal costs the Ashford Group had agreed to repay. He stared at it for 2 days. Then he deposited it because pride that costs your daughter something is not pride at all. It is vanity dressed up like hard work. He bought another borescope, not the same one, a used one from a shop in the next state over. In May, Gus Falzone offered him the maintenance shop at Cardinal Air Center. Not a job, the shop itself. By then, Gus was 69. His hip had gotten worse, and he wanted out of the maintenance business completely. He offered Elijah the equipment, the customer list, and the hangar lease for a price that Elijah, after going over the numbers 3 times at his kitchen table, still could not make square with fair market value in Gus's favor. "You're giving it away," Elijah said. "I'm selling it to somebody who'll still be here in 10 years. "Gus, don't." Gus held up a hand. "In October, I took you off my schedule because a man I'd never met asked a question about my insurance. I've thought about that every week since. So let me sell you a business and stop talking." Cross Aviation Services opened at Brayton Regional in July, in Hangar 2, with 2 employees and a backlog of work orders inherited from a man who wanted out. The first thing Elijah hung on the wall was not a certificate. It was a framed 8x10 photograph of 8 inches of chafed wire bundle against a fabricated bracket, with a steel ruler beside it for scale and the date in the corner. Customers asked about it all the time. He gave them the short version, that it was a wire on an airplane and that somebody had looked at it once and failed to write it down. Some of them understood. Most of them did not, and that was all right. Cleveland Pryor came to the shop on the second Saturday and walked the entire floor with his hands behind his back, studying the tool layout, the parts bins, and the lighting. And for 11 minutes, he did not say a word. Then he stopped in front of the framed photograph. He said. "That's all I get? You want a speech." Cleveland kept looking at the picture. "I gave you the speech 20 years ago, and you weren't listening, and then you went and did it anyway, which is how it always goes." He turned around. "For 16 years, I bit my tongue, Elijah. 16 years. And I want you to hear this from me once. And then we're going to go look at your compressor because it's mounted wrong." "All right. I'm glad I lived long enough to see somebody not have to," Cleveland said. Then he went to look at the compressor. It was mounted wrong. Roland Ashford came to Hangar 2 in September on a Tuesday, with rain falling again. He arrived by airplane, which was exactly the right way to arrive. Ashford Group had replaced the Meridian with a smaller aircraft and rebuilt its flight department from the ground up, bringing in an airline maintenance director and putting in a written policy that no discrepancy could be signed off without a corrective action description naming the component and the action taken. He wanted Cross Aviation Services to handle the annual inspection. "Before you answer, I want to make something clear," Ashford said. "I'm not doing you a favor, and I'd like you not to do me one. If your price is higher than the shop I'm using, I'm going to pay it. Because the last time I bought cheap maintenance, it cost me $2.8 million and a woman's spine." Elijah gave him the rate. It was the rate. No discount, no markup. Ashford signed the work order at the counter, and as he signed, he glanced over at the wall at the framed photograph of 8 inches of wire. "You hung it up," he said. "I did." "Why?" Elijah thought about it. "Because every person who walks in here is going to have something on their airplane that somebody looked at once and never wrote down," he said. "It's easier to point to a picture than to explain it." Ashford nodded. He set the pen down and didn't leave right away. "My grandson is 9, he said. "He's at that age where he takes things apart. Last month it was a coffee grinder." "Did he get it back together?" "No." "Then he's doing it right," Elijah said. That was the full extent of the personal side of the conversation, and it was enough. And both of them seemed to understand there wasn't going to be a friendship here, and that neither one owed the other anything. Ashford went out to his car. After that, he came back twice a year, for the annual and the mid-year, and he always paid within 11 days, and not once did he ask for anything taken off the invoice. The inspection stamp came out of the felt-lined box for the first time in 3 years, on a Thursday in August. It was a small thing, a steel hand stamp with his certificate number on it, the tool that makes a mechanic's signature mean the precise thing it means under the law. He had bought it when he was 26. It had sat in that box through the years on the road, through Camille's illness, through the truck shop, through a federal complaint and an administrative hold and a demand letter for $460,000. He returned a Beechcraft to service, and he wrote the entry, and he pressed the stamp into the logbook page and lifted it away. Then he stood at the bench for a moment with his thumb resting on the impression. Amara was 9 by then, and she had a job. The job was this. On Saturday mornings, she came to the shop and took inventory of the hardware bins, counting screws and fasteners into labeled drawers and marking them down on a sheet. And Elijah paid her $4 an hour out of his own pocket because there was no legal way to put a 9-year-old on payroll, and he wasn't about to pretend there was. She was extremely good at it. She had opinions about the labeling system. Back in July, she'd reorganized the entire rack over his objections, and she'd been right. On a Saturday in October, exactly a year after that cold morning in Hangar 4, she was standing on the step stool by the bin rack when she asked him a question without turning around. "Dad, what did you say to that man? In the hangar? The first time?" "He was at the workbench with a torque wrench." "Who told you about that?" "Bernie. A long time ago." Amara slid a handful of washers into a drawer. "She said you said something, and everybody stopped talking." Elijah set the wrench down. "I said, 'Then your jet stays dead.'" Amara turned around on the stool. "That is a good line," she said, with complete seriousness. "It wasn't a line, baby. It was just true. That's why it worked." He picked the wrench back up. "If it had been a line, he would have found somebody else to come back with a better one. You can't argue with a broken wire. That's why I do this and not something else." She thought about that. Then she went back to the washers.
"How many of these do we need?" "How many are there?"
41. "Then we need more than 41, Elijah said, and his daughter wrote something on the sheet and sighed at him in a way that was so completely her mother that he had to go stand in the parts room for a minute. I hope you enjoyed that story. Like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Cleveland Pryor died the following spring, in his sleep, at 82, 4 days after signing off on the annual inspection for a 1946 Aranca he had finally finished after 12 years. He flew it once. 11 minutes around the pattern at the North Field on a Tuesday morning, with nobody watching but Elijah and a line tech named Cody, who had driven out on his day off. At the funeral, Elijah spoke for about 40 seconds, because that was all Cleveland would have tolerated. He said that Cleveland Pryor had worked on a floor with 90 men in 1969, and only 2 of them looked like him, and that in 51 years he had never once put his stamp on something he wasn't sure of, and that this was harder than it sounded, and that most people would never know how hard. Then he sat down. The shop closes at 5:30 on Fridays now, which isn't standard in that line of work, and it costs him money, and it's not negotiable. The 2 of them stop at the diner on Ridge Road, and Amara orders the same thing every week and criticizes the coffee she isn't allowed to drink. On the way home in October, the sun goes down behind the field, and the airport beacon comes on, green and white, turning. She still asks about everything. She's moved on from landing gear to hydraulics. The photograph is still on the wall in Hangar 2, an 8x10 showing a piece of wire with the insulation worn off, with a steel ruler beside it for scale. Nobody laughed at Elijah Cross in Brayton after that October. But that was never really the point, and he would have told you that if you'd asked him. An airplane does not lie to you. It waits. He just kept showing up and looking properly.
Elijah Cross proves that real expertise doesn't need arrogance, status, or some fancy title to make it valid. Even after being mocked and threatened, he refused to compromise his principles, because he knew that human lives mattered more than money or corporate pressure. His courage wasn't loud or dramatic. It was the quiet choice to document the truth and stand by it, even when that cost him almost everything. This story is also a powerful reminder that judging someone by their job, appearance, or position can blind us to the value and experience standing right in front of us. Elijah deserves respect, not just for fixing the problem, but for refusing to pretend he hadn't found the truth when everyone else wanted an easier answer.